The world remembers certain names: Egypt, Rome, Greece, civilizations that built wonders, that shaped history, that are studied, admired, and constantly remembered. But there is another name, a land just as ancient, just as powerful, just as influential. A land the world rarely speaks about: Iran. Long before modern borders, before politics, before headlines, this land was known as Persia. And Persia was not just a kingdom, it was a force. Thousands of years ago, when much of the world was still forming its identity, Persia had already begun shaping its own. Empires rose here. Ideas were born here. Architecture reached heights that still leave people in silence. But somewhere along the way, the world stopped looking. If you stand today in the ruins of Persepolis, you feel something unusual. Not just history, power. Massive stone columns rise from the ground like frozen giants. Carvings still exist on walls that have survived centuries of time, war, and erosion. Each detail tells a story, not of survival, but of dominance. This was once the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, a place where kings ruled not just land, but influence. Cyrus the Great, a name that should be spoken more often. He was not just a conqueror, he was a builder of systems. He created one of the first known empires that allowed different cultures, languages, and religions to coexist under one rule. At a time when power meant destruction, he introduced balance, and that idea alone shaped the future. The Persian Empire stretched across continents, from the Indus Valley to the edges of Europe. It connected civilizations. It created trade routes. It established systems of communication that allowed messages to travel faster than ever before. This was not just expansion. This was organization. And yet, when people talk about history today, Persia is often a side note, a chapter, a mention, but never the focus. What makes Iran different is not just its history, it is its continuity, because this is not a land that disappeared. It is a land that transformed and still exists. Walk through the cities of Iran today, and you begin to see layers. Not just modern buildings, but echoes of the past. Markets that feel timeless. Streets that carry stories. Structures that blend centuries together. The architecture alone tells everything. Domes that seem to float. Mosques covered in blue tiles that reflect light like water. Patterns so precise, they feel almost impossible. Geometry turned into art. Step inside one of these spaces, and the outside world disappears. Sound softens. Light bends. Every surface is designed not just to be seen, but to be felt. This is not decoration. This is intention. Iranian architecture was never random. It was built on mathematics, symmetry, and meaning. Every pattern repeats with purpose. Every design carries balance. It is a visual language that speaks without words. And yet, most of the world has never truly seen it. Not because it does not exist, but because attention has been directed elsewhere. Iran is often viewed through one lens: politics, conflict, headlines. But that lens hides everything else. Because behind that surface is a civilization that contributed more than most realize. Persian carpets, for example. To many, they are just decoration, but in reality, they are history woven into fabric. Each design tells a story. Each color carries meaning. Each piece reflects generations of skill passed down through families. These are not products. They are identity. Then there is poetry. Persia gave the world voices that still echo today. Rumi, Hafez, poets whose words speak about love, existence, and the human soul in ways that feel timeless. Their work is not just read, it is felt in science, in philosophy, in medicine. Persian scholars contributed to fields that shaped modern understanding. But again, rarely highlighted. This is the pattern. Iran exists quietly in the background of global history, present, influential, but overlooked. And maybe that is what makes it powerful, because not everything that matters is loud. Iran is not a place that demands attention. It is a place that reveals itself, slowly, to those willing to look deeper. The deserts stretch wide and endless. Golden sands under an open sky. Silence that feels almost alive. The mountains rise strong and immovable. Snow-covered peaks watching over ancient valleys. A contrast of harshness and beauty. And within these landscapes, life continues. Markets open. People gather. Stories are shared. Traditions are preserved. Iran is not frozen in time. It is moving, adapting, continuing. But the deeper you look, the more you realize something. This is not just a country. This is a masterpiece. Not loud, not obvious, but layered, detailed, complex. A masterpiece the world has seen, but never truly understood. And that is where the story begins. The deeper you go into Iran, the more layers begin to reveal themselves. Because Persia was never just an empire that rose and fell. It was a foundation. After the fall of the early Persian empires, history did not end here. It evolved. New rulers came. New ideas entered. New identities formed. But something remained constant: the soul of the land. One of the most powerful transformations came with the arrival of Islam. At first glance, it may seem like a complete shift. A new religion, a new system, a new direction. But in Iran, it did not erase what came before. It blended with it. And from that blend, something extraordinary was created. The architecture changed, but not in a way that abandoned the past. It expanded it. Mosques began to rise across the land, not simple structures, but masterpieces of design. Domes that seemed to defy gravity, minarets that reached toward the sky, walls covered in intricate patterns that repeated endlessly without losing precision. Blue became dominant, deep, glowing, almost unreal. Tiles arranged in patterns so detailed, they felt infinite. If you stand inside one of these mosques, time disappears. Light enters through small openings, reflecting across thousands of surfaces. The patterns move as you move. The space feels alive. This was not just architecture. This was experience. Iranian builders did not just create buildings. They created emotion. They understood how space affects the human mind, how light changes perception, how symmetry creates calm. Every structure had a purpose beyond function. It was meant to draw you inward, to make you feel something without saying anything. And this level of detail did not happen by accident. It was the result of centuries of knowledge, mathematics, geometry, art, all combined into something that feels almost impossible to replicate today. But architecture was only one part. Culture continued to grow, not loudly, but deeply. In the homes of Iran, traditions were preserved with care. Families gathered around shared meals. Stories were passed down through generations. Respect was not taught, it was lived. Hospitality became a defining trait. Guests were not treated as visitors. They were treated as part of the family. Food was shared generously. Time was given freely. Conversations lasted longer than expected. Because in Iranian culture, connection matters. Then there is the bazaar. Walk through an Iranian bazaar, and you feel something different. It is not just a market, it is a world of its own. Long corridors stretch endlessly, lined with shops filled with color, texture, and sound. Spices fill the air, carpets hang like artwork. Voices blend into a constant rhythm of negotiation, laughter, and exchange. But beneath all of that, there is history. These bazaars have existed for centuries. They are not modern creations, they are continuations. Trade has always been part of Persia's identity. Located along the Silk Road, Iran became a bridge between East and West. Goods passed through here. Ideas passed through here. Cultures connected here. This land was never isolated, it was a connector. And that influence spread further than most people realize. Persian design influenced architecture across the Middle East and Central Asia. Persian language influenced literature and communication. Persian thought influenced philosophy and understanding. Even today, traces of Persia exist in places far beyond Iran. And yet, the recognition is limited because the modern world tends to simplify things. It reduces countries to headlines. It replaces depth with surface. Iran became one of those countries. For many people, the image of Iran is shaped by politics, by news, by conflict. But that image is incomplete because it does not show the beauty. It does not show the detail. It does not show the humanity. It does not show the masterpiece. There is a quiet contrast that exists within Iran. On one side, perception. On the other, reality. Perception sees tension. Reality shows tradition. Perception sees restriction. Reality shows expression. In forms that are subtle but powerful. Art still exists. Music still exists. Poetry still exists. And perhaps most importantly, identity still exists. Because Iran did not lose itself. It adapted. It changed forms. It shifted directions. But it never disappeared. The people carry it forward. In language, in customs, in everyday life. A simple conversation can reveal it. A shared meal can reflect it. A piece of art can express it. Iran is not something you understand by looking quickly. It requires patience, attention, willingness to see beyond what is presented, because what is hidden is often the most valuable. And Iran has always been hidden in plain sight, a civilization layered with meaning, a culture shaped by time, a land that has given more than it is credited for. And still, it remains overlooked, but not invisible, because once you begin to see it, you cannot unsee it. There is a reason some things remain hidden, not because they are small, but because they are misunderstood. Iran is one of those places. The world does not ignore it by accident. It overlooks it by focus. In a world driven by fast information, short attention, and constant headlines, only certain stories rise to the surface. Simple stories, clear narratives, easy to understand. But Iran is not simple. It is layered, complicated, deep, and depth often gets ignored. Because to understand Iran, you have to slow down. You have to look beyond what is shown. You have to separate image from reality. And most people never do that. Instead, they see fragments, pieces of a much larger story, and those pieces become the whole picture. But if you step back, if you take the time, if you look deeper, something begins to change. You start to notice the contrast. A country seen as rigid, but filled with creativity. A place described as distant, but rooted in connection. A land portrayed through conflict, but built on centuries of culture. And slowly, the image shifts, because Iran was never just what the world made it seem. It was always something more. Look at its people. Behind every tradition, there is meaning. Behind every custom, there is history. Behind every conversation, there is depth. Iranians do not just live life, they experience it. Through poetry, through art, through family, through memory. Even in the smallest moments, there is something intentional. A cup of tea shared between friends is not just a routine, it is connection, it is time, it is presence. A piece of calligraphy is not just writing, it is expression, it is balance, it is beauty shaped through discipline. A carpet is not just decoration, it is patience, it is heritage. It is a story that takes months, sometimes years to complete. This is how Iran exists, not loudly, but meaningfully. And that is what the world often misses, because attention today is drawn to what is immediate, what is dramatic, what is easy to consume. But Iran is not built for quick understanding. It is built like its architecture, layer by layer, detail by detail, meaning within meaning. And unless you look closely, you will only see the surface. That is why it feels overlooked. Not because it lacks importance, but because it requires effort to understand. And yet, those who take that effort see something different. They see a civilization that helped shape the world. They see influence hidden across continents. They see beauty that does not demand attention, but deserves it. They see the masterpiece. And once you see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. Because Iran is not defined by what is said about it. It is defined by what it truly is. A land of history that stretches beyond memory. A culture that carries itself through time. A place where the past and present exist together. without conflict. It has survived empires. It has adapted through change. It has held onto identity, even when everything around it shifted. That is not weakness. That is strength. And that strength is quiet, not the kind that dominates headlines, but the kind that endures, the kind that remains when everything else fades. And maybe that is why it feels hidden, because the strongest things do not always need to be seen. They simply exist. Iran does not try to prove itself. It does not try to compete for attention. It does not try to explain its worth. It stands, as it always has, a masterpiece, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable, once understood. And perhaps the truth is this: the world did not overlook Iran because it lacked value. It overlooked it because it never truly looked. And now, you have.